Hi guys. So I'm sure you've heard people talking online about AI and specifically AI art. I've heard people say AI is just learning how to create art by studying and training on other artists' work. And that's why we need to just feed it all of this art so it has all these data points because it's learning the same way an artist learns. And I'm here to say no, 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 no. And if that's how you think it is, you absolutely do not understand what it is and what it takes to be an artist and what artists are doing when they are doing their work. So my name is J.Heloise. I've been an artist for about 20 years now, and I even grew up in the arts doing music and acting, all kinds of things. But I went to school specifically for design. I went to Parsons School of Design in New York City, and I trained as a fashion designer in Illustrator. And since then, I've branched out. I've done commissions. I've sold my artwork. So I think I'm pretty well qualified to speak on this topic. And I've had my own small business for the last 15 years. You can find me online at www.J.Heloise.com. That's Heloise. But I have some art with me, and I wanted to kind of give you guys some examples of what goes into learning and creating real artwork, right? Because we have lots of people saying, a machine can do it just by studying artists' work from the past. When I've taught art, I've been very specific that I do not want students trying to train to do art by looking at artists' work from the past. Certainly that's valuable. However, I will never give an assignment where I say, look at Monet's work and now go paint and bring back a Monet, because that's not the process Monet went through to create Monet's artwork. Those artists at that time trained their entire lives by studying everything around them. And when students of art start out in design school or art school, they're usually required to spend usually a year to 2 years just doing observational drawing and painting. So it's a really important form of training where you are getting your eye and hand to calibrate to be able to render what you see in front of you. And that should not be taken lightly. It is years and years of training. I've been doing this, as a business for 15 years, and I still learn and I still push myself to learn more. And I'll give you an example of that. So, when I started with landscapes, I was about 12 years old at my summer camp. And if I can find the video, I'll try to put it in so you can see it, or a photo of one of the pieces I did then. But when I moved to the West Coast last year, I wanted to continue painting landscapes, especially sunsets. And this is a piece that I did recently that is not good. And I'm showing it to you because I want you to understand the amount of training that goes into every work, even for somebody who has years of experience. So this work, I was studying the clouds and I was trying to understand what they were doing and the effects of the light on the water. But the sunset was happening. It was happening quickly, so the colors all changed. The water was too much going on, and obviously the piece is very overworked. So then I did another version of it after that, and it was much simpler, and I was able to simplify because I already had an understanding of how to render the clouds. I also have studied birds for the last year since I moved here, which sounds silly, but I have this natural curiosity to try to understand, how do they move, how do they work, what are their shapes? And so to go into some of where artists get their technique, when we talk about technique, a lot of what I had to do in school, and I'm just giving you this background so you understand, because a lot of times in the arts, we hide the traces of our work, the hard work, whether it's dancing, trying to make the performance look effortless, or, if I'm rendering faces, for example, maybe I'm showing you, I'm trying to find the one that I'm thinking about. So if I'm showing you faces, okay, I might not show every single aspect of it. You might also not see the works that came before it that were not as successful. And here's another series of Faces Combined. A work like this, this is not how I started. I started as a fashion designer in Illustrator, and I was supposed to show faces, shopping, models, things like that. And I branched out to start telling other stories. And so part of what happens as an artist becomes more and more independent and rooted in their career is they start telling the stories that feel meaningful to them. There's a real aspect of intuition, and that's something I really want to get across in this. AI or any machine, they're not going to have intuition. That can't possibly exist for them. For me, it feels like almost a spiritual component, where I'm sort of given ideas. I gravitate towards certain things naturally, but it's not something that you can force into being. It has to come to you as a human being, and oftentimes it comes to you through struggle. But as I was saying before, I did want to get into detail a little bit about the technique, because I think that can't be overlooked. When I went to school, and again, these are things that a machine will never do. I had to train in all sorts of things. I had to understand the human body, proportions of different bodies, lengthening the body or shortening it, whatever that meant. Understanding, being able to render ruffles on a body, pleats, a garment with volume that's bigger than the body, a garment that's tight on the body, creating the illusion of something that's see-through. Or leather, high shine, like all of these things. And I was lucky to have amazing teachers. But that's something that it gives you choices. So when you train, when you build up technique, it gives you a whole mental toolbox that you can choose from. So when you sit down to paint, what you're actually doing is you're not just telling a story from A to Z. You're not just saying, there's that lamp over there, it's brown and gold. I'm gonna take my brown, I'm gonna take my gold, and poof, draw it in the shape it is, and here's the lamp. That's actually the opposite of what an artist does, because an artist has to make all these micro decisions while you're rendering that lamp. There are a million styles you could choose from, and especially the more advanced you are, the more you're going to have choices in what style you render that lamp. So I could say, well, do I want it to look edgy? Do I want it to be sort of washy, like it's a sort of a romantic, like late afternoon day, and, we hardly notice the lamp at all. It's a mood. And, that's something that if you are an illustrator with that kind of technique, you have a measure of control and choice that certainly a machine does not have, because they're not going to be going sequentially through every single brushstroke to create this. And it's wonderful because, if I sit down to paint something, like this was from last summer, and this was on Puget Sound. I wanted to show, the sun was obviously coming through these clouds, and in order to create the illusion that we were seeing, because obviously this is just a piece of paper, right? So how do I show this? I had to make sure to leave some of my paper blank in advance, because with watercolor, you don't want to color the whole paper in, because then you can't get that light back, because the light comes from your paper being white. And I was able to sort of remove some of this paint while I was painting and leave areas lighter so that I could have this illusion of sun coming through. And I decided, okay, I want these clouds up here, to look darker, because that is how they looked. But it's not a matter of mere analysis, and I want to get this across. A machine, you could today feed a photograph into any kind of all sorts of programs, and click a button for it to give you the scene in a certain style. That's not really effective at creating good art. I mean, you can create something that maybe resembles art, sure, but is it good? And an artist being in that sort of flow state, using all their skills, using their intuition, working from that really rooted creative place, and having the time and space to be able to do that, that is a lot of what creates good artwork. It's not a function of the technical breakdown of, okay, well, clouds are dark and, sun is light. It's far beyond that. And so I guess I just want to get across that not only is there a huge volume of technique, and also when I look at this work, I'm also looking at another choice I made, which was to show the water traveling in this particular direction. And also, as an artist too, I want to make clear that the color choices are really important. Each human being, we don't really compete with each other as artists, right? Because I hear people when they're arguing in favor of AI saying like, well, everyone's just using the same artistic language and working off of, artist works from the past. That is absolutely not true. Artists, I believe, inherently don't compete with each other because we are each here to say a different thing through our minds and our bodies and our hearts and our vision. And we're here to say it to different people, frankly. To be honest, it's a lot like, I don't know, like monks, Buddhist monks or something like that, where, each one is sort of born to a different place and time, and they're going to have a little following that is going to understand the teachings from them uniquely. I just believe that each artist has a really important human story to tell, and that may evolve. That's going to evolve and grow as their life evolves. The subject matter that speaks to me is not the same subject matter that spoke to me when I was 20. And that's why I'm really glad that I fought very hard to keep up my artistic career and to be able to create through an entire lifetime, not just in retirement. I think something that's really important when we talk about artist copyrights and whether or not artists are paid for their work, and that is sort of a conversation for another time. But I think it's really important to remember that a lot of artists in this country do their work without actually being paid for it. Many of the artists I've known who've been able to create a volume of work and offer it and share it to the public are often surviving, having other careers, other jobs, or they have family members who will pay for them or help them. And most often either they worked an entire career and they weren't even artists until they retired because they didn't even have that amount of support to be able to take the time and space to do that. Or they have a spouse that had, probably had to make sacrifices to help pay for them to be able to do this living. And when you look at the big picture, the volume of work that artists create, I just looked at a recent statistic, contributes $1 trillion to the US economy. That's a huge volume of money, and the artists themselves are not seeing much of that at all. So it is a big business, and for anyone out there saying, well, your work's just not good enough, just deal with it, that AI is going to replace you. Absolute BS. The people who run these industries that rely on artists' work, they know this is big money, and that's why they helped themselves in whatever way they tried to try to get our copyrights when we agreed to participate in social media. So the other element of AI being trained on artists' work is that, first of all, we did not give permission. We were not compensated, and our copyrights have been stolen from us. So if you look at United States copyright law, it does not grant anyone but the artist the right to their work, at least not while they're alive. So the right to work that anyone creates defaults back to them unless you have a contract with somebody else to be able to use your work. Nobody is supposed to be able to reproduce your work, to show it or share it. And obviously social media kind of went around that to try to allow people to share visual work. And at this point, it's one of the few ways that artists can actually be known or discovered, or potentially sell the work. So it's a very tricky spot and to be in, and artists don't have any kind of union or unified political voice. And when I say artists, I mean artists of all genres. I mean dancers, musicians. I mean, most of us share the same experience. There are exceptions and there are areas where it doesn't overlap. But generally speaking, with regards to this, it's very much true. I want to make clear that they do not have the right to be doing what they're doing. Nobody gave them the copyright to our work. They just took it. So it's a very big moral concern. But the last thing I want to say is that, artists also, and I'm trying to find the greeting cards. So I make and sell greeting cards, and I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. So I have this one that's kind of fun. I did this a couple of years ago. It's just like this big high, and then the card is blank inside, so you can write whatever you want. I've done animals, parrots. There's also a pig. So the heart is really popular. There's also a pig that people generally really like. Obviously, I love watercolor. I love color. I love exploring. So I'm always trying to sort of push the limits and find new ways to use watercolor. But I think that something that really gets overlooked is artists, especially ones who produce work for public consumption, commercial type work that's going to be sold, or who do representational work where you're actually seeing something that looks like a thing in the world. People who work with that as their medium have to dwell a lot in the space of understanding meaning and how what they draw or paint or whatever is going to convey a certain message, how it's going to come across to people. And you'd be very surprised that the slightest little change to something can make all the difference. Even trying to render a face. And by the way, rendering faces to me is something that is such a human experience because it really requires you to put yourself in this very empathetic place and understand the facial expressions that you are seeing and rendering. And that's one of my biggest tips actually for how to do faces well, is to envision the expression that the person is making. So there's a free little tip for you. But when you're conveying meaning, it's such a subtle thing. And you have to have a basic understanding of humanity, of what humans do or don't want to see, and how your message is going to come across through even the littlest detail, even a color choice. If I put a little too much red in the wrong place, that's going to look like blood. But I know that because I'm a human. That's not something that AI is going to know. I mean, maybe you could type it in and tell it to be careful about red, but that's kind of a weird roundabout way that's not ultimately going to be very effective. Because you go into it with a sense of your humanity, of what you're feeling, of what these shapes and symbols are, of how you're translating them, and you're working with the work as it comes into being. So when people say, oh, AI is going to learn how to do artwork the same way an artist does, no, because I just spent 18 minutes and 40 seconds telling you, just in a very short way, in a summary, about how my process has evolved as an artist and all the different variables and all the different decisions that I'm making in the moment. And so much of that is what I love. I love being in that world where it's a different realm and I'm going somewhere new each time. In my sort of imagination, you're working with memory, but you're also working with technique, and you're working with what's outside of you and also inside of you, because you're also having to deal with your ego saying, oh, you're doing really well, or oh, nobody's gonna like this. And that's an important part of the process too. So I think all of that is really important. And as artists, maybe we haven't been upfront enough with the public about what goes into the work. A lot of the point is to show something perfect and not show any of the traces of how you did it. But what I really want the public to understand is that art requires a life. It requires a whole life dedicated to thinking and seeing sensitively, having a sensitivity to your environment, to your own experience, having maybe a sense of ethics and morals. I think that helps. I think a lot of the artists that I've read about, whose work I admire, have had a really strong sense of ethics and morals. And, I think really seeking a sort of a shelter in that realm, in your medium, in that time and space where you are bringing into the world something totally new that didn't exist before, and it's going to unfold for you and also with you. And I think it's really special. I think we stand to lose a lot of that in a lot of different ways. The last thing or two I want to mention is, like, first of all, I think it's really dangerous that AI is being trained on our work without our permission, also because that means that it will be able to spit back something that looks like our work, but without us. It's not our story. It's not anything we approved of. It's just taking a style that may have taken years for us to cultivate and develop, and it's mimicking that style, but with no credit given. And there are very few industries where, I don't know of any real industries where you're supposed to simply take someone else's work without a fair exchange for it, without paying for it, without agreeing to it, them agreeing to it, and pass it off basically as your own. So that's a real moral violation. But also, the last thing I want to say is that a lot of times I see sort of the artistic process and what we do as being very much parallel to athletes and what athletes do. And I think one of the big tragedies of people sort of saying that AI is going to, end up doing this better than artists will, is that, people have been very clear they don't want to see AI create art. They want humans to do it. And I think of it sort of this way, where it's like, because each of us is resonating with different people through our stories. But if you were to watch the Olympics, and the Olympics were, conducted by a whole bunch of basically humanoid robots, would that be interesting? Would that be exciting? Would you even want to watch it? I think we all know that the answer is no. Because we want to see other people reach the greatest potential that they are capable of. And I would really, frankly, like to see artists come together and unify and have a voice, or maybe unionize and start to get some political power within this country, like every other industry has. Agriculture has lots of people lobbying for them. And, we as artists, we're sort of just given scraps and told to be thankful for them. But at the end of the day, if people want to see us succeed. The average person would love to go to a farmer's market and an artist market and discover something new. And I love to do that too. I love seeing someone else's work, whether it's from the past, whether it's other artists' work that I work with or near, or travel somewhere and see, oh wow, what is their unique take on their environment? Or, how do they render people? What colors do they use? What shapes are they gravitating towards? How do they see perspective? All of that. And so I think it will be a real tragedy, for humans, and at least for our society. I don't think that AI will last forever as the only form of art, but I think for as long as they're able to control the distribution channels for art, they will be able to substitute what we do as humans with AI, even if people don't want it or like it as much. If they have monopolies over all sorts of things, there's very little you can do to fight it. I think in the long term, we will definitely overcome this, and I think we'll find that more than ever, people want other humans to sort of cherish humanity and to really reach the best of what we're capable of and share that with each other. So I guess I just wanted to say that. It's been about 25 minutes, and this is obviously my whole career. This is my life. This is what I love. So I could certainly talk about it more, but thank you for bearing with me, and I hope that this sort of helps clarify some things that you may have heard people talking about, because I really feel like the public deserves to hear from the voices of real artists who've done this as a career for our entire lives, because no, is looking at artists' work from the past is not how you make good artwork. Sorry. Anyway, enjoy your day. I'm J.Heloise. My art can be found at my website, www.jheloise.com. That's Heloise. And there should be a link in my bio. Thanks.